Okay, so welcome to the tutorial, guys. In this first tutorial, I'm just going to kind of give you a quick overview of Photoshop. This is handy for anyone who's never really used Photoshop before, because I know it can be a bit alienating when you first start a new piece of software. So I'm just going to show you some of the kind of main menus and kind of the way around the software just to begin with. And then in later tutorials, we'll build it up and we'll kind of develop it a bit further. Okay. So obviously Adobe create Photoshop. A lot of the Adobe software is exactly the same. So a lot of these panels, if you start using After Effects or Illustrator, a lot of the icons and actually a lot of the tools will seem really familiar to you. Okay, so that's a handy thing, is once you learn it for Photoshop, you can kind of apply the different skills. Okay, so like most pieces of software, first thing you notice is you've got a menu bar up the top, which runs from File the whole way through the window. A lot of the options that you can do in Photoshop, you're just going to be able to grab them straight out of here. Okay. You've also got a toolbar that runs down the left hand side. Now traditionally in older versions of Photoshop this used to be like 2 columns, but now it's down to 1. Underneath that you've almost got like your options box. So this depends on whichever tool you're in. So as I flick through these different tools, you can see it changes. So it's what you would describe as being context sensitive. So if I'm in a brush setting, that's where I'm going to find the options for that brush. Okay. So that won't always look the same. That'll change quite often. So for whatever tool you're in, if you're not happy with the default settings, just take a quick look underneath your menu bar, and that's where you make some changes. Okay. Over on the right hand side, by default, I'll just reset this. By default, we've got color and swatches. Okay. So color consists of 2 boxes: your foreground color, which is the box that sits in front, and then the background color. Okay. And at the minute, I'm working in red, green, blue space, RGB space. So then I have 3 sliders in, and then values. Okay. So as I choose a color, using the color picker, you can see now it displays the RGB values for that color. Okay. Beside that is swatches, where you can actually load up bunches of pre-made kind of color palettes, and you can also save your own colors that maybe you're using fairly frequently over and over again. But that's something that we'll probably touch on later on. Underneath that, you've got something that just kind of appeared more recently in Photoshop. I started using, I think it was like CS1, stuff like that, and this didn't appear to be there. So this is your adjustments panel, so you can quickly apply adjustment layers instead of having to go up to the menu. And then beside that we've got styles, which are kind of like pre-made little kind of bunches of filters and bunches of styles that you can just quickly apply to any layer. Underneath that, you've got almost 3 sections that are kind of docked together in their own little piece of workspace. You've got layers, channels, and paths. Okay. For now, we're probably only going to use layers. Later on, we'll go into channels if we start doing some more detailed kind of tutorials and textures, and then we'll work with kind of more advanced selections later on in paths. Okay. So all this stuff can be pulled off. It can be dropped in the middle of kind of space. So you can almost create like your own customized workspace if you want. You can dock these back ends by dropping them over. You can close them if you want. So if at any stage you end up closing out basically everything in Photoshop and you can't get it back, if you just go up to Window, Workspace, and here you've got a bunch of kind of pre-made workspaces. So the one I'm in at the minute is called Essentials. So it's kind of Photoshop's default workspace. And all you do is hit Reset Essentials, and that'll knock everything back to normal. Okay. So if you ever kind of end up deleting one of these by mistake, or not really deleting but closing it, or you end up collapsing it and you can't get it back, all you have to do is go Window, Workspace, Reset Essentials. Okay. And you can see we've got different ones. We've got 3D, motion, painting. You can actually make your own workspace. So if anyone's interested, I might do a tutorial later on how you can make your own customized workspace. So if you are painting textures or you're coloring your own concept art, you might want a workspace that kind of cleans up most of the space and leaves you loads of room to get around. Okay. But for now, for this tutorial, I'm going to be kind of going through the menus, the toolbar, and mainly the layers panel, because that seems to be the first thing that you almost need to know in order to use Photoshop. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to make basically a blank new file. It's the same as any piece of software, to be honest. You always end up hitting File and then New. So whether you're in Microsoft Word or Maya or 3D Studio Max or Photoshop, it's normally the same thing. Okay, so all we do is go File. You can see you get a big list of options. Some of them are grayed out, which just means that you can't use them at the minute. So obviously we can't close anything or we can't save anything because we haven't got a file. So all we do is go File, New. You'll notice the shortcut for it is Control and N if anyone wants to use that. So this is our new file menu. So there's a couple of things just to pay attention to. It's a good habit to get into if you always name your file here. It just saves you a bit of work down the line where you have to enter in a name. So what we'll do is I'm going to name it Layers. Okay. Underneath that, you'll notice all these sections here now are in their own kind of little box. Okay. You can minimize the advanced sections if you don't want to look at them. So this will become kind of more apparent later on if you're working for video or web. You can kind of set a pixel aspect ratio. But for now, we're just going to work inside this little box here. Okay. So if you know exactly what size of file you want to make, you can just enter it in the width and the height. So if I knew I needed to make a texture, it was 1024 by 512, and this is in pixels. Okay. If I knew the resolution had to be 150, I could just enter that in like that. Okay. Now you can do different types of measurements. So you can work in pixels, inches, centimeters, millimeters, points, pikas, or columns. Okay. So it just depends what you're working. Normally for my tutorials, I'll be working in pixels. If I start doing stuff for print, like posters and covers, then I might start working in inches. Okay. But for today, we're going to work mainly in pixels. You'll notice at the top there's a little preset and then a custom beside it. That's because I've set my own settings, so Photoshop knows I'm not using any of its preset options. Now, if you do want to use these are awesome. It saves you a lot of time. You can just click in there, and it's broken into categories. So you got US paper, international paper, photo, and then underneath you've got kind of mobile and devices and film and video. So if we were, for example, making something that was to be A3, we could just go international paper. In this little drop down now, we've got an option that says size. We can hit A3. And what Photoshop does then is it does all the groundwork for you, it does all the hard stuff. It goes through and it actually sets all the sizes for you. Okay, so you notice now it's changed the millimeters, and it knows that A3 page is 297 millimeters by 420. Okay, I can still change these options later on. What will happen is it'll just turn it back into a custom file. Okay, but for now, what we're going to do is we're going to set up our own custom file just to make it a bit, get us used to the habit of doing it. Okay, so we're going to go to custom. I'm going to set this box here to pixels because I want to work with pixels, and we're going to enter in those original settings I said before. So we're going to go 1024, so 1024 pixels wide, and then we're going to go 512 pixels in height. Okay, we're going to do a resolution of 150. So it just means, what that means is for every inch of our document, we're going to have 150 pixels. Okay, so the higher the resolution, the crisper the quality you can get. If I had that set to 10, it would be very blocky, but it will also affect your file size. So as I change these options, it's going to output what it thinks the file size is going to be. So if I set that to 10, so I'll set it up. And we'll set it bigger, 1024. You can see now it's double the image size. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to go with 512 and a resolution of 150. Okay. We named our file called layers. It's fine. Now you could save a preset here if you wanted. So you could, if you were always making files a certain size for a client, then you could just save it. What we're going to do is hit OK. And there we go. So we've got our file now open in Photoshop. So I'm just going to show you a couple of quick tools to get around, and then in the next tutorial I'll kind of introduce the idea of layers and stuff like that. So navigation of Photoshop is fairly easy. Up the top, it gives you a lot of information. So you've got layers, which is the name of your file, and it'll always be an @ symbol, and then whatever percentage you're zoomed in. Okay, so there's a couple ways to zoom in Photoshop. You can use your zoom tool here, which is down the bottom underneath the little hand in the toolbar, and every time you click now it'll zoom in. Okay, so as soon as I click there, you can see it's taking me up to 200%. Okay, you obviously, like I said earlier on, this menu here changes depending on what you're in. So because I'm in the zoom tool, now it's a load of zoom menus. I can change that to minus, and every time I click now it's going to zoom out. So you can see now I'm looking at 66.6%. If I zoom out again, I'm at 50%. If I zoom out again, I'm at 33%. Okay, so that's one of the ways you can get around Photoshop. You can obviously change these settings up here, so you can flick between zoom in and zoom out. Other way to do it is you can actually right click, and you'll have a little pop-up set of options. So fit on screen will zoom you in as big as it can, and it'll fill up the whole canvas. So this is nice for looking at your whole image. So you can notice here we're not actually looking at the actual size. We've zoomed into 150%, and that's filled up the screen. You can right click and choose actual pixels, which will drop us down to 100% again. You can look at the print size. Okay, then you can just use your regular zoom in and zoom out. Okay, so a lot of the time in Photoshop there are 2 or 3 ways to do everything. So that's one way of zooming, is using kind of the long menu, but obviously if you're working as an artist and you're using this every day, you don't want to have to keep using the menus all the time. Okay, so I will change this to an Adobe just so it makes a bit more sense. Okay, so these are the shortcuts that we normally use for zooming. So we got Control and the plus symbol will zoom you in, and then obviously the opposite of that, so you only really need to remember one. Control and the minus symbol equals zoom out. Okay, so if I use Control plus, I'm zooming in. Control minus, I'm zooming out. Okay, so these are just kind of some of the basic ways that we can get around Photoshop. The next one I'm going to show you just before I finish the tutorial, I'll do a quick recap at the end, is you've got this little option above it, which is the hand tool. Okay, so the shortcut for the hand tool is H, and what the hand tool does is it lets you, once you're zoomed in, instead of having to zoom out and then zoom into another section, the hand tool will quickly let you move around, okay, your canvas. So if I was working over here on this little piece of image and I wanted to see the bit on the right, instead of having to come out and then zoom back in, I can stay zoomed in the whole time and just use the hand tool. Okay, now there's a couple of changes in the most recent version, well, a couple of more recent versions of Photoshop. If I hold down H and then click, what it does is it pops me out the full menu, and then I can move my view to somewhere else. So if I'm working over here, for example, I hold down H, click, and I want to move over here, and then I let go and it'll zip me in. So it's really handy for kind of darting around your canvas as much as you want. It's really good for kind of doing some really quick changes. The other way of getting into the hand tool is no matter what tool you're on, if you push the space bar, hold it down, then you can click and drag. Okay, so we're not actually changing this file, we're not changing the size of anything, we're just changing the way that we're viewing it. Okay, so it's just kind of recap. Your zoom tool is down the bottom of your toolbar. Okay, the shortcut for the zoom tool is Z. Your hand tool is above it. So when you're using the zoom tool, a couple of ways you can use it. You can use the long menu here at the top if you want, where you can change if it's plus or minus. You can also use Alt on your keyboard. Okay, so I'm in the minus tool here. If I click, it's going to zoom me out. If I hold down Alt and click, it's going to give me kind of the opposite. So it's going to zoom me in. You've got your options of right clicking, which is fit on screen, actual pixels, print size, and then you can zoom in and you can zoom out again. And then just to get a bit more advanced, so kind of the more advanced settings would be Control and plus on your keyboard zooms you in, Control and minus on your keyboard will zoom you out. Okay, so I hope that kind of explained just real quickly how we can navigate around in Photoshop. I mean, there's a lot more settings we can go into. Later on we've got like the navigator panel and stuff like that. But for now I think that's probably enough for everyone just to roughly get started. Okay. Okay guys, so that was the first Photoshop tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Here are the shortcuts that I mentioned during the tutorial. So I'll try and put a link in the description as well where you can actually get access to these or download them. Any of my students from the college, these will be up on the Learning Zone for you guys to get access to. If there's anything in particular that you would like to learn, or you have any kind of comments or suggestions, feel free to leave me a comment in the comments below, or send me a message, and subscribe as well. So, thank you.